What's up guys, this is Cher talking, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'll be making a full review for the Romancing Festival SaGa Sinistrals banner that brings Forneus, this time a new type of counter for single targets, but also some utility by buffing the party and cleansing debuffs. There is also Alloces, a type of tank that gets stronger the more it gets hit, and Aunus, a critical type of damage dealer with healing mechanics for remembrance. Well, let's start talking about Forneus, and this time they made him a little of a hybrid unit. You can see 115% STR, 90% for endurance and will, so well can resist both physical and magical attacks. It's a pretty slow character with only 82 agility, most characters are now getting around 100% at least, has 91% intelligence because it can debuff and also inherit spells. Well, when compared to the past versions, it does not beat the endurance of monster version. In 4 passives we have Sea Lord's Territory. On the start of a round, he grants himself a heat up that increases damage potential by 15% for the whole fight. This can trigger at a max of 10 times per battle, but it will not trigger like that unless you are in an event with 10 rounds. If you are on a boss fight, there's only 1 round usually, sometimes 2. And when you are farming story mode, there are 3 waves. That means that you have turn 1 with 15%, then second wave with 30%, then wave number 3 with 45%. Just increases damage, but it's not important to be honest. Then we have a second effect that applies defense down to all targets by decreasing their defenses by 10%. This translates into a 4 to 5% increase in damage for all your characters. This stays for the whole fight, so well, it's free increase. Then on every 3 turns, counting from the start of battle, that means turn 3, 6, 9, 12 and beyond, he will remove all the buffs applied to your party for all different status. It will also increase all your status by 25%. Well, that's pretty big, right? 25%, well, we have to check someone here. Nala's daughter has a buff called Water Festival, and she buffs all surviving allies by 25% as well, all different status. But she also grants defense boost that decreases damage taken by 15%, lasts for 4 turns, and also gives them BP by 1. So at least you are copying the first part of the effects, and you are doing that passively. You are not using an active skill to do this. But well, Forneus is locked into buffing from turn 3 onwards. Nala's daughter can start buffing on turn 1, and she gives the defense boost that helps a lot decreasing damage taken. You can still use both, depending on the situation if you have both, but then it will hardly ever be needed. If you have Matriarch buffing a primary status either with Paean of Peace or with Paean of Victory, you can choose one of those, but it will depend on the situations, but more into that later. Now the second passive, Elemental Heal 2, on the end of a turn recovers around 200 HP. On odd turns, that being 1, 3, 5 and beyond, it will recover 2 points of PP. Since it's every 2 turns, let's consider this character 4 PP per turn character. And then on even turns, that means 2, 4, 6 and beyond, it will self-buff STR, Endurance and Will by 15%. It's interesting because on turn 2 you are buffing by 15%, and on turn 3 you are also self-buffing by 25%. Remember that? This effect will be for everyone, including himself. So he can reach very high status, especially because he still has a skill that buffs even more. Then the last one is called High Protect Tension, decreasing damage taken by 30%, increasing damage potential by 20%. So it's the only damage passive besides the heat up effect. So in boss fights he only has 35% increase in damage, and on farming it just scales a little better, but he's not really a very good farmer. It's a character to use it for boss fights and remembrances. Now, let's move into the skills. The first one is called Lightning Needles. It's a free full AoE attack with only E power. That's similar to normal attack, but it's AoE. Very nice. Has Pierce and Lightning, and has a chance to buff the enemy's endurance by 15% on max level. So the intelligence is not as big as it could have been. It will miss in some bosses with very high will, unless you are bringing something like Paean of Victory that buffs intelligence. But it's just a free attack anyway. The second skill is called Goblin Will Pull. It's a full AoE fast attack that deals deep power, 10 mod cold damage only. It's not impressive, but then the user will enter a defensive counter stance that reduces damage taken but still takes damage. will also nullify all indirect attacks for this specific turn. That's cool because sometimes you bring a counter unit and it just ends up taking too much damage from indirect attacks. And when you take direct attacks, you will counter with Trident Fall. This is a triple S attack with Pierce and Cold damage that will also try to debuff the enemy endurance by 15% on max level. So it's a strong attack. Well, it's pretty similar to what we have with this second Global Axe, Urpina. She has this Falling Petals attack. It's faster and will also just go for bigger damage. And then she enters an evasive counter stance that will counter with Slash and Cold. So in this case, both have cold damage, but Urpina has Slash and Forneus has Pierce. And Forneus version has a little lower cost because of having a weaker attack opener. And Urpina recovers BP when she counters. She may just counter too many times, but in the case of Forneus, he actually counters every 2 turns. There's nothing else to help him get more BP. The counter attackers are an interesting idea if your boss has many direct attacks. Forneus has access to a full AoE counter as well, with Tidal Lure. That's also 8 PP cost from his monster version, so you can now choose what you actually want to do. Maelstrom is just cold in full AoE, but if it's only one enemy, you will be using Gobbleroo Pool because this one you just trigger a stronger single target attack. The last attack is called Double Ice Strike. For 10 BP you have a 2-hit attack that hits for Pierce and Cold damage. On each hit it will buff the user STR, Endurance and Will by up to 25% on max level. That means the second hit will do a little more damage. That's interesting because this 3 status is what you also buff passively. So on turn 1 you can buff 2 times, then you can buff again on turn 2, and then on turn 3 you will always be buffing again because you will be buffing the whole party. So this is his gameplay, self-buffing a lot to protect against physical indirect attacks while increasing the damage output as well by STR buffs. You can use him as a damage dealer and then a buffer by passive. Well, he won't be stronger than our current damage dealers like Schuzer, Silver, Leon, but he will be a very good contender for Remembrance. It's just that on Remembrance battle with Spears, you don't have that much problem since Matriarch leads the way. You can use almost any type of damage dealer and things will just work. But he can't be used on hard challenges as well, since he will be providing these buffs passively. People will just use Forneus on auto ag battle, for example, since he just makes stuff faster and can use it on auto easily. It's an interesting setup. I have to say that all status buffs every 3 turns is interesting, but I doubt they will just leave Forneus being the only one. On JP there is a character called Razan that buffs 5 different status every turn, so it stacks better. It's just similar to Matriarch. The buff values are not as big, but pretty close, and well, in JP they even replaced Matriarch with this new character. But I don't think this will happen in Global because our versions of Matriarch always got buffs and they are much better than the JP counterparts, meaning that when the time comes, you will be using Matriarch plus this Razan character, most likely. So it's pretty far, probably like 8 months away. So Forneus has a place in the meta right now, but that time will not be forever. So it's an entire setup that works how it is, but I think it's much better investment for those that already have the monster version, because you can attack with Tidal Lure and use an AoE counter attack that it's also pretty nice. If you have the first human style, you can also inherit Prime Pump. This one gives him a guard up medium, so that he can actually use this between the counter mechanic, and also increase to cold attack. That is actually pretty big and lasts for 2 turns as well. So you can use Prime Pump, counter, Prime Pump, and counter. From the mage version, I don't think anything here matters too much. He could just use this Tenderous Fury, but this one just buffs intelligence. It's not something that he gets from his new style. So it's all about having the monster version for full AoE attack, or having the first human style to just use Prime Pump. Well, the character is good right now. We receive a triple S grade, and that time may not last too long. Just understand that, but it's a very interesting design for the current meta. But even then, I don't think that he is a must-have. He's a good character to have, but if you don't have enough chance with the many different banners being here, you can skip him. As extra info, there is another version of Forneus in the timeline, and this one is just as tanky and has a more offensive design. There is this attack that has 4S power and it self-buffs before attacking but can only be used twice. It has an extra attack on overdrive, and when it's attacked, it grants attack enhancement, so for counter strategies it will do more, and also has a heat up for each turn instead of a round. But the current one has at least party support, and that may be more interesting more often. The next character is Alloces, and as you can see, 115% STR as well, other character that uses spears, and we have even higher endurance and will with this character. A low dexterity, but it still should be enough in most cases. Agility is on the low levels, and that's it. For passives, we have Earthlord Deeds. When landing an attack, it will buff STR by 20%. And then when landing a direct attack, we recover BP by 1. Well, most of his attacks are direct, and I will cover this later. But when being attacked, it will buff all endurance and will by 15%. Well, that's interesting, right? It reminds me of Strumnikin, but Strumnikin buffs actually 20% for both STR, endurance, and will. It's better. There are other characters with similar mechanics like Robin Liz and Robin Polka. And the next, when being directly attacked, those attacks that you want to counter, it will grant himself heat up, increasing damage potential by 15%, and this can trigger a max of 10 times in battle. So you should be using this Alloces in a Rising Phoenix X formation, for example, where it gets endurance and will buffs already, and will also get even more by just getting directly attacked, being hit, and will stack and increasing damage. It's a different design, it's a tank that becomes a little of a very strong damage dealer. The second one is called Warrior's Power 2. On the start of a turn, you have a 50% chance to trigger an attack boost that increases damage by 30% and lasts for 3 turns. This value can stack, so if you are super lucky, you can get like 90% increasing damage if it triggers 3 times. But we should talk about average values here. Well, you will have average of 45% increasing damage when considering a very long fight, and it will cover 2 BP. That means that, well, in average 1.5 BP on 3 turns, or you can say that this character has 4 BP per turn on average. Then we have High Protect Tension, decreasing damage taken by 30%, increasing damage potential by 20%. As you can see, he's not a really good farmer because he relies on chance and relies on attacking to self-buff, so made for boss fights and remembrance. Moving on for skills, we have Rushing Thrust, a free single target attack with Pierce and Blunt, that is direct, so it will trigger all of his effects. So it's just an attack that you use instead of using normal attack, and also nice for full auto rotations. The second skill is called Scorching Bull Charge. For 10 BP you have a single target attack with pierce and hit damage and triple S power. The user will then enter a taunt stance with medium effect that lasts for 4 turns, so it will increase the chance of being attacked. Then it will also grant the user Guard Up Large, decreasing damage by 35%. This lasts for 2 turns. That's interesting. If you're using a formation like Rising Phoenix X, like I said, you will have a decreasing damage already, and then you will decrease this even further, you will taunt even further, and that will allow him to just buff Endurance Will and then get the heat up effect when getting directly attacked. But it's strange because the character itself does not have a counter attack. That's right, he doesn't. Well, moving on, we have All-In Assault. This is a 4S attack with only blunt damage this time, and it just attacks a single enemy. But 4S attacks for 10 BP, it's like the future, right? We got something similar with Matriarch. Well, you can see in her latest style. 10 BP for a 4S attack. So it's a powerful attack that you can actually use after you stacked all your hit-ups. Because on the start, I think you are much better off just using Scorching Bull Charge to draw more enemy attacks and protect yourself. The character does not self-heal. Remember that, so he still needs help from healer to staying alive. So, well, this character was actually made for remembrance. Again, you don't need that much help from remembrance when using spears because Meteorarch leads the way and anything actually works. But you can open the fight, use the fast attack, grant yourself the taunt and guard up, and see how many times you can get the heat up effect, and then, well, when you got it all, start choosing all in assault, because the enemies there are weak to all sorts of damage types. In some boss fights, you will not find them weak to both of the two attacks, so it may be better to just keep using Scorching Bull Charge in some scenarios, or just using All In Assault, if you are using him for damage. But, well, I can say that he becomes extremely powerful by long fights, but it takes just too much time building up that you will still do more damage with Silver. Leon will still do more as well, because Leon just becomes a 6-hit attacker in the end, and easily beats any competition. So, well, it's a character that works, but doesn't have much meaning in trying to replace the current characters. And I think it just lacked something, like an effect to self-heal, or additional effects in one of the other skills. Now for Inheritance, this character was designed to not rely on anything. So there is this attack called Scorching Hell that has a cheaper cost, that you could use after he reached the full heat effects, but then again, he would not get taunt and guard up, so it may be a little more dangerous if you did not stack so many endurances and will. So the character is interesting. It will work on Remembrance, but I don't see many people using Alloces for hard challenges in general. It's a little too niche. It will depend on the enemy using direct attacks against you. It will depend on triggering your effects many times. It has to be an enemy that attack multiple times in a turn as well, or multiple enemies. So you are a little more restricted by investing on Alloces. Still, the potential is here. It's just that this strategy does not cover much ground. You're still gonna take an SS Plus grade by raw amount of power and by working on some specific situations, but it becomes an easy skip, sadly. The next character is Aunus, and he is a mage again, just like his past style. And we have an improvement over all status, save for STR and Endurance. That's just almost the same, but we have a very nice intelligence with 119 being one of the highest. Agility is 94, good enough, but he can also use some fast attacks. And will is 80%, that's just okay, I guess. And for passives, we have Firelord Nanner. You nullify all attacks that has heat as property. If your enemy attacks with something that has both heat and cold damage, it will negate it entirely. The second effect is all critical attack damage will increase by 50%. More into that later. When you are landing a critical attack, interesting, you recover 2 BP. You will also grant yourself a defense up that decreases damage taken by 15%. But this can stack and reach 5 times in battle. That's insane, right? 5 times minus 15% stackable. That means that if you can actually trigger this critical effect, you're gonna be very sustainable. And you can force that, and I will explain later. The next one is called Critical Knowledge 4. All of your attacks will become critical against humans and plants. So you at least have 2 enemy types that will be critical all the time. But you can expand that further, but more about that later. Then the second effect is critical attack damage will increase by 30%. The third passive is called Great Lethal Tension, that increases damage at all times by 30%, and then it further increases by another 30 if you are landing a critical attack. So what do you actually have here? You have 30% at all times, but then you have 110% when landing critical, reaching 140% in max potential when landing critical, but that's actually 160% because when you do a critical attack you get an extra 20%. So, well, this is gonna be very awesome, right? But when you land critical attacks. Moving on, the first spell is called Takizaki Crab Heal. For 2 BP and 1 LP, you will recover between 1.6k on max level, and you also grant morale up medium. That is 25% increase in damage and lasts for 2 turns. Well, we have Ogniana as a healer for Remembrance, remember? And she is a character that has this skill called Toast, She recovers and gives heat up, and then buffs STR and agility. That's interesting and useful for members. People have using Ogniana in some fights, and she was enough to help out clearing the stage number 20. Now you have Aunus as a replacement, and Aunus may help more than Ogniana in long setups. But that's not his only mechanic. He can also attack with the skill number 2 called Scorching Sun Slash. This is a full AoE attack with hit and slash damage, D power 13 mod only. That's pretty weak. But it gets critical damage against beasts and beastmen. Well, we have many beastmen that are already weak to heat, so you're gonna do plenty of damage. Some beasts are already weak to either hit or slash, so it makes sense, the combination is cool. But the skill itself is not that strong. You will feel like you're doing B power damage on max potential, so it may solo some story stages, but on events this is not going to make much changes. But remember that when you land a critical attack and recover 2 BP, that means that he can actually use this skill as much as he wants, as long as he is attacking critical weak enemies. And well, since it also costs only 5 BP, you can use 3 times in a row, but if you are not landing critical damage, the damage will be pretty bad. Remember that. Then the last skill is called Blazing Crabs. It's a single target attack with both heat and blunt triple S damage, and it has critical effects against aquatic and fish. This one is a little harder to comprehend, but see, he's boiling some crabs here, that's what makes sense out of this. But fishes are not weak to heat. They are usually weak to blunt, just like the aquatic enemies as well. So you'll be doing critical damage against enemies that are weak to blunt most of the time, but the fire effect here does not matter too much. So, well, there's not that many boss fights where you fight aquatic and fish, but you can fight Forneus and also some other bosses as well. But in order to take full advantage of this Aunus, you will need to land critical attacks, and it will help him in his 2 different utilities. Well, the first and more important one actually comes from his past style. We have the Flame Barrier. This is a 9 BP spell that will just nullify all hit damage to the party, and also applies a regen on the end of a turn, healing around 200 for everyone. This is interesting even if you are not negating hits, since it will help you on remembrance. Now, you can use that on turn 1, right? And then, after that, you will have to use a normal attack with critical effect in order to get 5 BP back. That's interesting, and I have to say that it's the best approach, because you will also be triggering the defense up by turn 2. And then on turn 3, you will also be triggering defense up again. But how do you actually do that? In the recent story update, we got Lapis Weapon. Those weapons have a chance of giving you a passive that increases critical damage, or that creates critical damage against specific enemy types. Well, let's talk about the ones that we have with this update. Critical plus for human, male, female, and giant. Nice. The second one, critical against max and rock. The third one, critical against beastmen and beast. The fourth one, critical against dragons and reptiles. The fifth one, critical against plants and insects. Okay, so if you are fighting against the real queen, for example, go and craft a fire axe that has at least critical plus against plants and insect. If you are fighting against Wuhan, for example, craft a fire axe that has critical damage against human, female, male, and giant. See what I'm getting at? That means that in this case, you'll be triggering your defense up, saving BP, and you can even attack later in between turns with your stronger attacks. After you stack it 5 times, you can just use Blazing Crabs on Overdrive, for example. Nothing is stopping you, and you will still always have enough BP to cast the Fire Shield every 3 turns, keeping your party alive by healing them. So it's a very interesting design, and works for remembrance, but also when facing enemies that attack with heat damage, mostly. Okay, the other utility for this Aunus actually comes from Burning Sickle. Well, this attack has a first hit that is not critical to anything. The second hit is critical against flying enemies. But there is something interesting. Let's say that you don't need to bring Aunus as a healer. You actually want him to do damage. He actually does a lot, remember? From critical effects. But his second attack doesn't have such a high power. And the third one is just okay, could be better, right? You then inherit Burning Sickle. It attacks 2 times with the power. You will feel like you are doing S power damage. So, if you land 2 critical hits, you will recover 4 BP plus 3 BP on the end of the turn. And by doing that, you'll be able to trigger 2 defense ups in 1 turn. On turn 2 you already have 4 out of the 5 you can actually get. And besides, we still have to remember the full potential damage of Burning Sickle with so much damage passives. You will have to craft many different fire axes to attack different types of enemies in order to get the full potential. But once you do have, he is going to do more damage than Galahad Ice Cream Edition, much more damage than Waterfall Blade Plus users, but still requires so much investment that I don't know if it's worth the hassle. Remembrance, you can just keep using Burning Sickle, and then when you reach Overdrive, you will have a surplus to use something like Blazing Crabs, and the weapon will give critical against the enemy with all of your attacks. That means that you can even sometimes heal with Takazaki Crab Heal if you want. You will always have enough BP for that. But then he is not an AoE healer anymore, he became a single target healer attacker with very strong damage. But it requires crafting a fire axe with lapis materials. So it's something made for veterans more than anything. I don't think the other inheritances matter too much, but you can actually go to his UDX style. Delay Break hits 2 times with B power. It feels like a triple S attack. And then now you will recover BP 2 times if you are equipping a critical weapon and hitting enemies with the right effect. And there is also Ablation Dance that could be used for damage as well if you are bringing other characters that also have heat attacks. Okay, so in the end it's an interesting upgrade over the first mage style, but it requires having it to take full advantage. So Aunus will receive an SS Plus grade, because he relies too much on a very specific build in having his first mage style in order to take full potential. Without the first mage style, I don't even recommend pulling for this Aunus. Seriously, even if he is a healer to help in Remembrance without the inheritance options, I think he's inferior to Ogniana, for example. But that's the character, there's no future styles of him. SS Plus grade makes sense to me. Now, getting back to the banner image, is this banner worth summoning for? Well, if you have the monster version of Forneus, and then the first mage version of Aunus, and you are a veteran, well, I believe that's worth to pull here, but the value is not that big. I will still give this a silver award, but the newcomers should not be pulling here, because that is not a banner made for general utility. It's more niche, and even if the characters are good, you will not be using them every day. With all that said, this is my opinion. What is yours? Please say here in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe if you haven't, and if you want to support the channel, please use the links on the description. I hope to see you soon in the next video or the next live stream. Bye.